Hi, I'm Lasse Rindom, and I appreciate you listening in to this episode of The Only Constant. Sharing is caring, and it means a lot. If this episode sparks a thought with you, pass it on. You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Marc Lawn, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Marc, and welcome to another episode of The Only Constant. I'm really happy that you're on the show with me today, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation for our listeners. So thank you for being here with me.
Looking forward to it. It's great to be here.
So, Marc, you post a lot about strategy and also a lot of about what you could call downsides of over ambition and sort of hubris on AI as well and technology in general. And when we discussed this episode, we agreed to do just three simple things. So discuss what are some of the dangers and troubles of the technology, and also where are some of the hypesters right? Where are we right in envisioning this is a very bright future? So, what is the hybris and what is the hubris to some extent, right? And then maybe land in the end on a mandate for businesses to follow right now. So that's what we've decided to do. And I still think that's a really great outline. So let's just kick this off, Marc, and ask you, where are the hypesters right?
Fascinating question, isn't it? Because, we spend our time dissecting the things that we don't think are right and where there is the sort of the overhype. But I think the hypesters are right in the sense of it's a fundamental change to the way that we operate in business is AI. There's huge opportunities there. Of that, there's no doubt. The ability to research quickly, the ability to append, and I talk about quite often the support rather than supplant humans in the environment. So the ability to support humans in their decision making, their working life is quite significant, and I think that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of. Yes, there will be bumps along the way, and every technology adoption, you can't find me one that hasn't had something along those lines where there's been a couple of bumps along the way.
We'll get to those, I think. But
absolutely. I think that the other side of it is that I think AI will force us to organize in a way that we haven't done before as well. And I think there are people that are talking about the way that work gets organized. And we've been talking about sort of the future of work or work of the future, depending on which viewpoint you take on that statement. We've been talking about that for quite a while. AI, I think, starts to nudges in that direction in a way that we probably hadn't envisaged previously. I mean, a lot of those debates were the work from home, return to office type debates.
But also the debate, right, with the, everyone's been saying that, we've been working the same way for 100 years. We're still measuring it on hours or, hourly rates, and we're not measuring on outcome. We're still measuring we're still organized like we were 150 years ago in the same hierarchies, right? It's stuff like that as well. Are we finally getting the push to do something different?
I think absolutely. The way that information is now being democratized across the organization,
Mm.
The traditional power hierarchy, so to speak, will be undone in a way that we probably hadn't seen previously. As you think about education, what that did was it moved the bar, but there was still a differentiator. It was access to information and the likes. Whereas now AI will give that every desktop, every handheld, whatever it happens to be. An ability to gather information in a way that hasn't been previously possible.
Mm. And we need this, right? We need to start thinking differently about how we work. I know we've been talking about, people have been talking about this for years, right? That we need to start thinking differently about the way we work. But like I said, with automation and RPA back in the day, I said this is the reason you streamline your processes so you can automate it. So is AI now actually the perfect, I don't know, goal on the horizon for us to sort of reorganize and make it better?
I think it is. I think it is. I think there's a lot of opportunity in there to re-envision how things were done. I think we've managed process. I mean, it's interesting you mention process. I talk about that quite a lot.
Mm.
We manage process in a way that is all about a control mechanism. It's less about adding value and it's more about adding control. And so we add more steps, we do certain things, whatever it happens to be. If there's a benchmark or baseline, whereas AI can support us to be able to have a minimum quality standard, then why wouldn't we be able to completely re-envision the way that we operate in terms of the processes we run? Think about the systemic thinkers out there. The fact that most of our processes are done in linear fashion because management theory came from engineering and production lines. And so everything's a very efficient linear A to B type process, whereas AI gives us the ability to interact across processes in a way that we probably hadn't envisaged before. And it makes it easier for the human to understand the system.
But that's also sort of the chaotic side of it, right? There's sort of I think what I thought about when you said the nonlinear. I immediately thought about these unstructured data lakes as well. You just throw some data in here and then we make stuff happen, right? To some extent, that's been a trend as well for a lot of years. And is AI sort of a continuation of that way of thinking? And moving away from this whole streamlined, tight control on things, or what do you think? And what does that bring to us in business if we can do it that way?
I think it brings to us the opportunity to think much more broadly than we do today. We tend to break things down into smaller component pieces because it makes it easier for us to do that. AI allows us to break those silos. There is and we'll probably come back to this, there's sort of a downside of the data side of things that we'll come back to around. You mentioned the chaotic element, and I think we should dial up that piece a little bit later. But the ability to organize in a way that we haven't been able to previously, those sort of, remember the days of big data and that there was the sort of the big element around that. And what it ended up being was sort of we ended up with a bigger repository. We didn't necessarily have bigger insights, whereas I think AI will be able to pull those insights in a better way than we have historically. Though, again, sort of onto the other side of that equation, we'll have to look at that and explore that side of things. But yeah, no, it brings together the dynamics across an organization in a way that you think about. One of the big opportunities here is the ability to use the interfaces in the different parts of the organization to align. Because one of the big issues we have today is you record let's take a customer address as boring sort of scenario. You get a customer address and you take that and you deliver the first point, and then the customer moves in between. And if you invoice the right address, who spoke to them from customer service? Did the sales rep actually know? And quite often, all that data is going into different databases. Whereas AI has the ability to say, well, actually, the last touch point was this, and therefore we'll update all of those records. So the ability to do things like that in real time, it comes back to what marketeers have been talking about for a long time, with sort of that 360 view of a customer that's been spoken about for a period. This enables all of those different disparate databases to be managed in that way that AI is probably uniquely positioned to be able to do so.
But that's also because it's a chaos agent to some extent, right? But it also manages and can move in chaos. Is a machine with an opinion, so it's able to opinionate on the things it sees, and it can do it, sort of restlessly, right, continuously, all the time in an automation setup, right? So it adds us some powers that we've never had before in that sense, right? That we can use for so many things. Also to maybe take control of the whole control aspect of processes. You said that before, there's been, processes have typically been more about less value and more control. But now maybe AI can help us do the controlling, and we can sort of be more focused on value.
I think that's where the differentiator comes. I mean, I think the biggest where the hypesters are right now, how it manifests itself, I think, is a different scenario. But I think the ability to reflect where value is created, as opposed to we're moving something through a machine, which effectively is what we spend too much time doing today. That value creation element, and we've seen it with Klarna, haven't we? We saw it with the Klarna CEO that a few months back said, "Oh, well, that's it. I'm not recruiting anybody anymore, and that's it. AI is going to take over." And then a few months later, it's like, actually, customers really value talking to a real person. Okay.
Actually, something like the reason we automate with AI is so you can speak to a real person when it matters, right? Something like that, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think it's freeing up, again, it's the opportunity to free up the human to do the things that actually only human connectivity can do.
Taking the robot out of the human, right?
Exactly. And we've created a lot of robot in humans, let's be honest, in that sense. There's not many people that would feel good about doing a lean assessment, a process assessment using lean methodology in their back office function. And your process quality score is about how much percentage of time is spent adding value to a process versus just doing stuff. And that becomes a fascinating one, because even a top level process, they reckon on lean that a good score is 20% of your time is adding value. So therefore 80% of your time effectively is just doing stuff.
Yeah.
Imagine if we could liberate that 80% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So there's tons of upsides here. But also I think some of the other things that some of the hypesters are also saying is that the fault in AI is sort of on us. The reason it's not working well is because we're doing wrong. How do you feel about that?
It's a fascinating one, isn't it? The machine blames the human blames the machine.
It's not. It's really the humans making the AI blaming the humans, not adopting their brilliant machine, right? But are they right? Are they right? They are right, actually, to some extent, aren't they?
They are right. I think they're right on the sense that we haven't figured it out yet in terms of that. So what is it we're trying to use it for? And I think they're right on the basis of the sort of the chaotic way that we think today probably isn't the right chaotic way for thinking in the future. And so there is a frame of reference piece there. There's no doubt that we are guilty of many of our own sort of downfalls, so to speak, along the way. The bit that's fascinating in the we're ruining AI type dynamic is I think many organizations struggle to figure out how they're going to enable people in their organization to do something with it. So obviously we've still got some of that piece going around where it's on a controlled lockdown almost in many organizations after the sort of initial frenzy of trying things out, and then realizing that maybe we need to do something slightly different, approach different. So it's the typical pendulum, isn't it? Huge opportunity, then we go, oh crikey, that's a bit of, I'm not sure about that. So we've now locked it down too far. So we're probably now driving with the handbrake on, so to speak, a little bit with it, and then it'll ease up over time and we'll find somewhere that's a nice equilibrium.
It's like this, I think there's this people are being told to focus their attention all the time. So you should no, you should not do this or that. You should focus on this. This is what I know will bring you value now. But do we need to maybe loosen up on that a little bit? Allow people to have a broader, I don't know, attention span. Maybe it's the wrong word, but actually, all you need is attention. That's also what your employees need. They need attention on the new things, the new ways of working, right? If you narrow them down to just focus on this because that's what I hired you for. Then maybe we're losing out on the opportunity, aren't we?
I think we are. I mean, at the end of the day, go all the way back through human history. Who decided they were going to rub stones together or sticks together to get fire?
Mm.
If you'd have processed it, you wouldn't have said, "Oh, yeah, just try that," and create something called friction that we didn't know anything about at that stage. So I think discovery does come from being able to allow employees effectively to trial things. And at the same time, then I think you manage that in the classic sort of safe sandpit scenario. So okay, then we don't want a machine telling somebody that they can have their flight for $10 or whatever it was, as we had with Southwest. Yeah, we don't want those sorts of examples. But we do want to trial things, because otherwise we won't learn and we won't push boundaries and we won't find the applications. It'll be people that are programming that aren't necessarily sat in the environment who have got the right idea to try and test stuff. But if we don't give the input in, then we can't really realize the hype that's there, which is back to the hype is right. What we haven't figured out yet is where it's right.
Yeah. Yes. And now I actually don't know your age, Mark, but I'm 41, and I feel like what generative AI has done to me is turned me into a boomer overnight. Sometimes, right? When I'm sitting there thinking of all the problems with it, and it was so nice 20 years ago, and I just realized the other day that my I'm now a person with old yellow pictures, right? I've become that old. That some of the pictures of my childhood look really dated. I'm like, whoa, that happened to me. Crazy, man, right? But I think Gen AI to some extent makes me feel that even more than before. And isn't that also part of the problem, right? That we have a brilliant technology here, and we're failing it because we are so stubbornly rooted in not wanting to just embrace it and say, "Whoa, this is amazing." We've seen all the sci-fi movies. We wish for this, right?
Yeah, as you know, it's fascinating. I'll give you a quick story. I remember back in so I have a few years on you. So mine starts with a 5. Luckily, it's in the early start of 5s, but it's fascinating. And I remember, if we go back, I don't know, about 20 years probably, where the mobile phone operators were desperately trying to get the
Oh,
older
I
generation.
thought you were going to talk about Arsenal's last championship, but anyway, okay, good.
Oh, well, 20 years ago was about right as well. Yeah. But then again, as a Man United fan, it's been almost just as long now, hasn't it? And it's been definitely more painful along the way. But no, we'll avoid football for all the reasons that sort of go with my last statement. But yeah, on the text message side of things, it was fascinating, wasn't it? And I remember O2 in the UK deciding that it was going to write out to 50 somethings, telling them how to send a text message, because nobody was taking up texts over the age of 50. And literally within a few years, all of a sudden, the 50-year-olds were almost the biggest texters on the planet. Almost, it so felt like. And it had nothing to do with the nudges and everything else like that. It was the kids grew up, and basically that was the way they communicated with the kids. And so I think there's a certain part around social shifts happen in a certain way. That doesn't mean we can't accelerate them a little bit, but I suppose in the Western world, we can't ignore the fact is that we've got an aging and shrinking workforce. That's a reality. As of this year, I think it's 40% of the UK working age adults are over 50. So yeah, there's going to be a natural lag, so to speak, in some respects on that basis.
But that also means I think today I think the Danish mail, what do you call mail authority? What do you call that? They just said a couple of weeks back that they were not gonna do mail services anymore. So they're only going to do packages. So and that's a tremendous shift. It should be right, but they don't earn any money on it anymore. It's a complete black hole of just losses. Uh, but there's still this will force people to become digital, right? And is that what we need to do to older generations? Just force it on them, or what do you think?
Yeah, there is it's interesting, isn't it? We talk about accessibility in so many different ways, and we tend to look at it from our own perspective, and we have the same debate around cash, don't we? I mean, actually, many countries have a legal requirement to provide cash, which is fascinating. But is it, in many respects, is it fair to expect somebody to be forced into that position? You could argue that it potentially marginalizes people. So I think there's a balancing act here. And the same goes with AI, is that somebody who is further into their career, that is less likely to be at the front of adoption there's just a natural evolution piece here. I don't think it is. We've seen it, haven't we, time again? It's SAP. Let's talk to IT systems. So we switch something off, whatever that was, and then we switch on SAP, and we hear all of the disaster stories, don't we? About this happened, that happened. I couldn't ship to customers, couldn't bill, whatever it happens to be. So the next new technology needs some form of overlap. The question's always going to be how long the overlap's there for, because you can't switch everything off all at once effectively.
I think as Stephen Pemberton said, I've also quoted him. He said that in the second episode of the podcast. I also quoted him in other episodes that the older generations need to die. And he didn't say get killed, but they need to die for something new to grow. Maybe there's something. I just thought of that now. This curiosity killed the cat, and the closer you are to your own death, you really don't want to die. But the younger you are, you're like, whoa, whatever. I have 9 lives, right? I don't know, but is there something there? Curiosity, does that diminish? And I'm just now it's a completely different thing, maybe. But it seems to be some sort of anger and sadness at the same time at that perspective, right? And some of the reasons that I think Christina Strauss said in the last episode, 2 episodes back, that a lot of people are either before or against it, just naturally for or against it. That's just the main position, and then they cover it up in so many intellectual phrasings and terms to make it sound like it's a well articulated position, but in reality, it's just fear, anger, sadness. What do you think? Do we have sad enterprises, Mark?
I think we always
angry
have
ones.
I think, well, we definitely have angry ones. We know that much, but we're not getting into geopolitics at the moment. We always have fearful organizations. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the case studies, would we? The Kodaks of this world and the likes there, where it's like, no, I'm going to protect my core business. And I'm a firm believer that the concept of shadow organizations inside well-established organizations. So you get the support, so to speak, of the larger organization, but you need to be able to create something inside that isn't beholden to the way that things are done.
Yeah. Tom Goodman said, he's been wondering why companies don't have kids. He said that on the episode, right? Yeah. Why don't they have kids? Why don't they build something new, completely different, but same what do you call it, domain, but completely new and fresh and curious?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of it is it's the structures we put in place as an organization grows and develops. It becomes much more predictable, which is back to the control mechanism, which is back to the more processes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how it happens. The bit where organizations are successful is they were able to create, so we'll take the kids scenario, is they can create the creche inside the organization that allows the kids to play, but they've got the safety and the support. But the classic scenario is financial frameworks, for example. So we operate large organizations or any organization that's established for a period of time in a particular way. So we know our return on capital is this, we know our return on sales is this, and within a boundary. And then what happens is we apply those same rules and assumptions to something brand new and then wonder why it doesn't work. It's like, oh, it's too small, it's not really making a difference, and so therefore we're not interested in that because we need this, and all of those types of things. Or its returns are too high, its returns are too small. We don't understand it, and we're not allowing it to breathe inside.
Yeah, but we just spoke just before, and let me see if I can even finish this thought, right? But we spoke just before the recording this that I bought new speakers in the weekend, and I bought some small ones because I wanted to fit on the bookshelf and make my wife happy, right? And then she came home from a weekend with her cousin, and then she said, "Why did you buy so small speakers? I told you to buy bigger speakers. I told you to buy something you'd be happy for with, you know." I'm like, "What?" So. And my point with this thing is that that surprised me. Her response really surprised me. Like, go buy some bigger speakers. You know, what wife ever said that? But there's some this surprise is it feels like it's also, and now I'm not going to get sentimental, but that fuels love, and love is to feel affected and affection for something, and is curiosity, this kind of positive curiosity, this positive surprise. Isn't that something we need? Also in business and in every aspect of our lives to I think Carl Friston said it as well, when you have an element of surprise, you're alive, right? And are we simply entrenching our own organizations too much and not necessarily, not to the root of them, actually having this curious sense? Do we need to the Hypestars, right? Do we need to be more curious?
Oh, I absolutely think we need to be more curious. We tend to hold our own rules on things, and quite often it's the classic project management piece is, well, I put it down on a piece of paper and it said it would be June the 1st, it would be delivered. And so everybody slows down if it's going to be earlier because it was like June the 1st is the day we said. And all of a sudden the panic and alarm bells go because it's going to be July the 1st. And it was like, but it was an arbitrary decision. We made a point in time and we said, we think it's going to look like this. But it suddenly becomes the truth. And there's an element underneath all of that. And I think the word I'd add to it is trust. So take your wife example, is she trusts you to make the right decision. You're now not going to come home with something that's going to be 16 feet by 16 feet. That's then going to be the monstrosity that goes the other way.
No, but she wants to be a little bit displeased as well. She wants to be a little bit displeased with the size, right?
Of course, yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. It's the invite, isn't it? To the make me feel uncomfortable because I trust you in that sense, but make me feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
And we don't really do that in business. That's the thing, is we tend to say, I remember years ago, I worked with Martin Glenn when he was at PepsiCo, but one of the phrases he used was to, we aim low to avoid disappointment so often, because it's like, well, and the point was, if you think about organizational sort of cultures and the way we reward and recognize organizations, we'll say, right, the growth this year, especially for an established organization, growth this year is going to be 3 to 5%. And you could almost write it for most organizations before we even get there. And 3 to 5, and you might hit 3 and a bit. Yeah, and you're like, great. But what if we aspired for 15? Would we get 7? Yeah, those types of things. And do we box ourselves in by the way we're thinking, and because of all of the mechanisms that are there that drive us to the safest answer, as opposed to not necessarily, as opposed to the most creative answer? So back to your curious point.
If it's twofold, right? For every employee wants to, retain their position, their job, and they also want to make sure they are ready to get the better job, right? That's the way it always goes, right? And are we sort of putting too much emphasis on, staying in the job? Is that the point? Is companies to focus on staying in the job? Giving too low predictions. I don't know. I love the way you said, I trust you to make me slightly uncomfortable. I think that's actually a good quote that I'm hoping to use from this episode as well, because it's also a very British way to put it. Slightly uncomfortable. It sounds really neat, Mark. But no, but I think this trust in being a little bit uncomfortable is just so essential here, right? Are we allowing that, and we're allowing us to feel this discomfort, right?
Exactly, and I don't think we are. I don't think we are. I think it's back to the pendulum comments, which was we opened up the play area and everybody managed to sort of damage themselves on the walls on the outside edge.
Mm.
And now what we're trying to do is now bubble wrap everything and hope that it's all going to be fine. And there has to be a balancing act in between all of that. We can't put too many restraints on it, because otherwise, we're going to miss the opportunities that are there. And I think that's part of the market disconnect at the moment, is the organizations aren't necessarily stepping forward, and the people with the ideas are trying to interpret what the organizations are looking for. And guess what? We're slightly misaligned on that.
Yeah, exactly. Is this, someone said that this is the biggest change management project ever. It's a global change management project, AI now, right? Generative AI. Do you agree with that?
I think it is. I'd say that COVID was the one before it, actually. I think COVID was probably because it was so forced onto people and it had to be done literally real time. I'd point to COVID as probably the biggest one, but at the same time, what I'd say is, based on COVID, is that at the end of the day, it shows we can do it.
Yeah, and it's sort of passed, right? Generative AI is not passing over, is it?
Correct. Yeah, no, it's going to continue to evolve, and it's being able to understand where it's going to evolve and how it's going to evolve. It's a bit of the Wayne Gretzky comment, as I skate to where the puck's going to be. That's going to be the key within this, because the disruptors outside of industry don't have the baggage of industry, and so therefore they'll be able to move a lot faster.
But it's really funny, right? Because this is exactly this to some extent what I'm sensing in the market as well. Also, I work at Basico and we focus on the CFO space, right? And I think a lot of CFOs and probably also other C-suite members have been slightly viewing this generative AI as like, okay, let's see if it's a fad. Because we've seen these hype cycles before, all move into blockchain. Oh, no, let's move into metaverse. No, let's not. Oh, let's scale up here. No, not that way. It's been all these. So it's been like, yeah, we love our AI and we're gonna, because boardrooms start talking about it. Oh, yeah. So everyone's been like, last 2 years, okay, spending a couple of million on some, I don't know, big consulting firm doing a strategy and blah 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 whatnot, right? But now I feel like it's changing. They're like, okay, this is staying. The hype is still there and things are changing. Oh, they're really building this into my ERP system now, Okay. So things are, they realize the puck is going to go someplace, further up the field. Do you call that the ice skate field? What do you call it? And I don't know.
No, you got me there. On the ice. Let's just call it on the ice.
Yeah, exactly. No, but because we go to football, right? Further up the field, right? You need to move up there. You need to have a fast winger. Do we have a fast winger who can catch that ball, right? Do you sense the same thing? I think the hype has gone on so long now. It's people are starting to say, okay, this will be a thing.
I think it will be a thing. And I think there's lots less. You mentioned blockchain. And I think blockchain's still around effectively. There's still the thought process around blockchain.
But my point is that they're not disappointed. They're not sad that they sort of left that hype. They were like, okay, fine. It's there. It's okay. I'm not touching it right now.
No, I think absolutely. And I think the AI piece has gone beyond there's a lot of noise around this. And we've seen with market corrections that the overhype is now coming back in terms of that. So I think organizations need to sit up and look at it in a fairly serious way versus we've got a few things that we're trying on this, and understand how it's going to be able to unify their organization in a way that it hasn't done, we haven't been able to do previously, or whether it's going to, let's call it, liberate the workforce in a way that we haven't been able to do previously. And it could be a combination of the two, but I think serious thought needs to go into it now from a C-suite level.
Yeah, and also because, and this is what I think we should bridge into right now. There will be some, probably some pitfalls as well to this, right? That you need to be aware of if you want to harvest this productivity as well. So, and I wanted to kick off this, the dangers and troubles, or maybe maybe not just that, but sometimes just this the more subtle implications of this as well. And I actually want to ask you, so the Industrial Revolution, and now I'm doing that because you're British as well, right? So you sort of invented that, right? And you gave affluency to the world, and thank you. And it's been 200 years of bankers and what do you call it, conveyor belts. Thank you, Mark. But but that's sort of a determined process that brought so much value to humanity. And yeah, I don't think any that is the revolution that made us rich in the end. And with all of the different information age, blah, 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 it's sort of the same thing. That's why we still have the same roles, the same hourly rates, and still on hours, right? Just how many hours are you spending on the conveyor belt? I don't know. I'm doing PowerPoints. I have no clue what a conveyor belt even is. I've never seen one, right? But are we risking that now?
Are we risking that? I think it depends on what you decide as risk, doesn't it? I mean, it's how you see risk. I think.
Like you said, determined process. That's what we've had, right? And you said something's changing. Are we risking all of the good stuff from a determined process with, predictable value outcomes?
I think as we end up with a bit of an overlap in this, I think we are going to risk elements of things. There's going to be shortfalls either way. We're either going to remove the process too much, or we're going to have the process too much involved in it. There are existing paradigms. It's the classic shifting paradigm scenario, isn't it? And we're going to make mistakes along the way, no doubt about it. And I think we'll see, and it's a completely separate topic, but I think that the movement around sustainability also will come and play a big part in all of this, because it's going to make economists think differently. We still think in a very traditional eternal growth type environment and think and operate that way. But I think AI will help us shape that differently as well, because it's going to decouple the way that the world has worked. And I think that's been an interesting part. So you sort of do that linkage of traditional growth, which is 1 unit in gives you 1 unit out, and you sort of carry on. There's been a concept in the middle, which was the whole decoupling concept, which was 1 unit in gives you 2 units out, however that happens. And then you've got the degrowth agenda, which is the furthest end of that from the sustainability movement. Now, AI, I think, gets you to the decoupling in a way that we probably hadn't envisaged previously. We'll be much more able to produce an output that is then not directly linked to the number of hours, so we won't have to monitor hours in the same way. And exactly as you say, is that you're asking me about hours. Well, it just depends on. I'm in the knowledge world, so therefore I'm producing PowerPoint. Well, it takes as long as it takes me to think about the damn idea, doesn't it? In that sense.
Exactly.
And actually, research isn't even a part of that. We know that, we've seen, and we sort of bridge into the gaps element here, which is AI being used to sort of throw PowerPoint slides together. Great, that's nice facts dumped, but effectively it's the classic, like anything with data. Data is the what, it's not the why. And it takes the humans to convert to the why. It's that causality link that we can't get because of the way that the data comes, because data is not contextualized. It's a bit like saying, it's a bit like a marketeer saying, well, I know what you buy in terms of toothpaste, and therefore I know your behavior in a cinema. It's just, it's a completely different environment, and I'll act in a completely different way depending on who I'm with and all of those types of things. And it's that where the human will come in. And we're going to make those mistakes along the way. We're going to drop the ball. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, there's also this, so you bought, I can't remember who said it, was it Christiana or Kate, but who said that, so you bought a toaster for $500 on Amazon. So what about buying another toaster, because that's generating on on historic data to some extent, right? But there's just, I think you're absolutely right on the why, and why we want to do things, and that matters so much here, right? Because I've always spoken about this the tender and bidder process. So everyone's now making tender material with AI, and every bidder is making bidding material with AI. And I always feel like they're missing the point on why they're doing these things. There's a compliance thing, there's a productivity thing, there's an accountability thing to this process. However tedious it is and time consuming it is, that actually requires you to think about the questions and think about, you know, are we just going, we all hope we're going to go full blown value here, right? But maybe we're just going full blown pseudo work, right? And that's my biggest fear, I think, sometimes.
Oh yeah, if we're not careful, we'll chase the wrong puck. To keep that analogy going,
Mm,
that'll be the danger. If you think about it, take it to its furthest extreme, using an example you just said there, which is, imagine an AI buyer and an AI seller trying to negotiate with each other, basically with the only remit to get the best deal they possibly can. Well, that conversation's never ending, is it? It's because neither of them's going to compromise.
and there's no subtle value there either. It's just pure. It feels like we can go down a route where it's like pure productivity, and we sort of elevate pure productivity to, to be the god of everything on the pedestal, and we're forgetting the subtle values of what it actually means when we're providing assurances or partnerships or stuff like that to each other, right? Do you agree with that? What do you see?
No, I think that's fair. I think the future of business has much more rooting in collaboration than it probably ever has done,
Mm,
uh, for many reasons. Some of them just the way the world is adjusting and pivoting at the moment.
mm,
Some of it is the way that technology is developing, is you can't be an expert in everything. And I think organizations are starting to realize that. Um, but I also think collaboration is the bit that brings out the sort of the magic in terms of that. Otherwise, we've become almost too data led, which loses that context. Is like, well, we did this because, and then we see these issues appear because historically this is what happened. And we love a linear regression analysis, don't we? As a that last 5 years plus or minus a couple of percentage points, and therefore that's the future and the trajectory. And the reality is we're seeing less of that being true. So human creativity needs to be appended with the ability to take all of those data points and convert them in real time, which is, I think, where what's part of the AI power becomes, is the ability to stay on top of these massive, massive data sets in a way that a human being can't. But the human being still needs the judgment call around it.
mm.
I commented on somebody's post this morning about procurement on LinkedIn, and it was, if procurement is basically focused on price, then they sort of lost. And there's a truth to that. Yeah, price is always going to be important, but rarely, actually, in my experience, is it the most important thing that you're going to be focused on.
Mm.
It is all about that value creation. It's not about value extraction, which is that price down mentality, because we'll end up with an AI implementation globally that's just commoditized to the lowest common denominator otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. But that okay, and I just thought of something that maybe it's too difficult a question, but because I asked you about the industrial era thing, and the whole Brit and all that, but the whole Adam Smith and division of labor thing, right? That is essentially, if you boil it down, and maybe I'm completely misunderstanding it, but that says have a narrow focus and be good at what you do. But I feel like with AI right now, we're saying the opposite. Open up your focus to be broader than that. Is that the real shift? And how does that sort of translate into a mandate right now?
So I think it is the shift, but I think it actually starts at a human level rather than an organizational level to start with. So if you think about the way that the Industrial Revolution and Adam's sort of comments have taken us, is we value deep specialization. It's why we get recruitment adverts that go out saying, I want somebody with 25 years of experience in this industry that's worked basically for one of my three competitors. And then we wonder why we're not a hotbed of innovation, because the same three people just keep rotating around the organizations. And so we valued that for a long period of time, because it was all about value extraction. Because the smarter I can become in the process, we come back to processes, we're more streamlined. So I can take a 10% cost out of that process or whatever it happens to be. But we weren't really creating value. We were just extracting as much as we possibly could. And when we look at organizations that have done well in the last 20, 30 years, it's all been about value creation. And so AI enables that to start at a human level. So it's not going to be, crikey, I remember one of the early conversations in a large corporate when in my employed days, and they used to have this horrible phrase, which was your career anchor. Yeah, well, we want your career anchor, so that if the proverbial hits the fan, what are you going to rely on? Yeah, what's your anchor? And effectively, if you said something at that point in time, let's say you said sales, it's like you were a salesperson for the rest of your life, and you're going to be a sales rep to a sales manager or to a senior sales manager, or you might go off to key accounts and then
no,
come back.
That's like all these people like, I want to be a pianist, a musician, right? But I'm just doing, my fallback plan is to be, I don't know, an engineer. So I'm taking an engineering degree, and then what do you end up doing?
Guess what?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Exactly. So I think AI enables, in a way that we haven't seen before, people to naturally learn things that are outside of their natural remit in an organization. So to be much more attuned as a salesperson into marketing concepts or whatever it happens to be, and generalists in organizations are going to be much more valuable, and AI supports that, because an organization can't afford to educate everybody on all of those things.
But I know we're supposed to talk about a little bit about some of the pitfalls and dangers as well here right now. But now it seems like we're stuck in some of the positive things. The point is, if AI can take all the narrow focus stuff because they can focus and do this productivity thing, are we then broadening out again? Just like I remember I read some pieces about how and no clue if it's true, right? But the Stone Age man had a better brain than we did because he had to do multiple tasks at the same time. While we're only narrowly focusing on one thing, we're not using our body the same way. But are we suddenly sort of opening up our focus to be broad creatures again, or will it make us shallow? And I think the depth versus shallow, is that a real discussion we should be having here? I feel there is a discussion there, that you see it everywhere, and so me as well, right? And emails and everything is suddenly becoming very shallow. Everyone can make a framework about everything, right? It's and doesn't matter, right? It feels like it's like whatever, because everyone can do it.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the whole thinking idea is a really important one. So
how do we keep our focus open, as we have to do, without becoming shallow, Marc?
Well, I think that comes, we're going to go right back to education and education systems, aren't we? Which is, education will need to adapt to AI, for example. So we see a lot around the headlines around, they submitted their whatever thesis and it was clearly AI generated. Well, that's a reality of the world we're in. But then the emphasis isn't on the thesis. The emphasis has to be on the deep understanding of the knowledge that goes behind the thesis. And so the way we assess those exams effectively needs to change. Whereas we tried it. I mean, the UK education system tried this. We've gone from trying to cater to all sorts of things, but ultimately the very, very simplistic part was, you used to be able to get credit for showing you're working on something, your logic to get something. So even if you got the wrong answer, if you went about it the right way, then you get some credit for that. We then started to value the answer over the logic, and we've gone that way. And then we've shortened attention spans and everything. So we need to come back a bit in terms of that. But it comes back to how we educate both our children and the next generations, but also it's how we educate in an organization as well.
I think, Casper Jung said, I have quoted this before, and I love this quote from my podcast. He said, uh, um, uh, we have an AI now that can finish any thought, right? But how do you finish a thought that people didn't have, right? How do you finish someone's thought if they don't have any thoughts? So we need to learn how to think again. But at the same time, now there is a really maddening paradox here that I don't think any sci-fi writer really saw coming. That in an age of artificial intelligence, you need to start being intelligent yourself again, and that are, are we? I mean, how do we do that? How does that make sense? Right? How does that make sense? Because I heard someone say the other day that some few people will be smarter and better and more creative and all that with this AI tool, but most people are lazy.
And I think humans have always been that. That's the thing, isn't it? Evolution, everything's been about making life, in inverted commas, easier for ourselves, however you define that. I remember having lunch with somebody in the AI space probably 6-9 months ago, and over lunch I said to them, "There's here's the challenge: is AI would have never found Australia because there was no data point to it. It took a human being to be mad enough to get into a small boat and get onto the seas and hope they'd find something before they died, effectively." Only human spirit and endeavor can do that, and there's a thinking element that goes with it. Now, you could say that takes it to the insane extreme, but it is that makes us human. That ability to try something different, to say there's
slight insanity.
Exactly, ever so slightly insane. There's nothing wrong with that at all. We love the ever so slightly insane people, because they are the ones that break the rules. They're the ones that break the boundaries.
And they're slightly uncomfortable. And if we trust them, now we're back.
We're back to trust, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, in terms of that. And I think that is something that we have to do more of and encourage, both in our organizations and across our institutions, because otherwise we get back to what we've been talking about, which is this process element where we're trying to refine a percentage point on a percentage point on a percentage point and wondering why the world doesn't really move that much.
But it seems like we are going to make education evil again. Like, when there's something decoupling here, right? Because if we decouple learning how to think, right, from the reality that people are in. So let's say we have a farmer who knows what he's going to do on the farm in the 18th century all the time. But now he's being forced as well to go to school, where he's like, okay, I have to learn this, and the teacher is hitting me because I have to learn to think. But I know I'm going to go back to the farm. I'm going to inherit it, and I know what to do there, right? So now we have a situation where AI can do anything, and we're going to force people to think. Well, they feel, I don't have to. Can we do that? AI can think for me, right?
AI within the bounds of what you
need
AI
to have
does.
the demand. We need to demand of them. We need to set the why all the time, right? What if we say, I don't want to set the why? What world will we have then, Mark? If people say, I don't want to do that.
I do fear, and I think this is probably the big downside of AI, and the large statements don't help either, do they? I mean, a certain Mr. I own a car company who shall not be named sort of said, well, AI has learned everything that humans have ever produced. It's like, well, most of it's never been digitized, and we've got to remember that the majority of human knowledge hasn't been digitized. Mm-hmm. When I bought my house, is the traditional sort of UK thing is when I bought my house, because it's the beauty of the UK system, and so the house was built in the mid 1700s, and I probably got 700 documents relating to it that go back as far as 1784 or what have you. I can barely read the document of 1784 because it's in the most exquisite calligraphy ever. But in reality, that knowledge is never captured anywhere. And I think there's something about that side of things. We've almost lowered the value of knowledge in favor of data, and we conflate the two. Data isn't knowledge. Data is just a set of information that we need to apply something to. AI, I would say at this point in time, unless we find some way of having super intelligence, it's great at spotting patterns, but it's not intelligent in its own right. And I think we sometimes mistake that. And I know people would debate with me on that one, but I think it's just
No, but I think you're right. It's about this. It's also about it's. It's good enough that you know everything we've done. Also, digital. If we've assumed that, but you don't know what to do in the future. We don't know what the good future will be anyway, because we've never been able to do that. No historian would ever say that. And I'm a historian. That because you study history, you know exactly what to do in any situation. You don't. I can tell you, we don't know that either, right? We tend to think that history enlightens our decision, and it does, but it's not going to say this is what you have to do, right? There's no black, there's no binary here. And I think that leads me back to what Carl Friston said on the podcast, that it's about these uh, um, uh, it's about being self-evidencing in the now, feeling that I want to go take a swim because I want to take a swim for no other reason than that. I'm curious about this because I'm curious about it, and for no other reason I'm curious, right? Than just being curious because this will tell me that I exist, and that's the human thing, right? I exist. That's why I'm curious about this weird sensation. And AI doesn't have that. That's what he said. It doesn't have that. And I call that a sort of a providential intelligence instead, because it has a pre-understanding of how the world will unfold, because it's been pre-trained, but it doesn't have any real sense of, now this is something that matters to me that I might want to happen for this short-term or long-term future.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think here's an interesting way of looking at it. Are we any lazier now than we were 200-300 years ago? Because we've always had a certain part of society that was happy to do whatever they did. And it used to be that the town crier would come out and would say, hear ye, hear ye. And that was how they got their news. And they were happy with their news that way. Are we more acutely aware because we're more connected than we have been historically? So we're now not on a local platform. We're now on a global platform. So if you think even just in my lifetime, and I said I start with a 5, but it's the reality is when I entered the workplace, the vast majority of jobs were you'd find a job that was local to you, probably in a local newspaper. Then jobs became national newspapers, and then they became the internet. And I remember advertising for a role in an organization that I was in to be based in the US. And 80% of the applicants didn't even come from the US.
Yeah.
That's the reality. Now, that 80% would never have even heard about that opportunity probably only 20 years earlier.
Yeah, but and are we lazier? Are we? I'm not even. I for many different reasons, I think that we are not lazier. I think that if you just look a little bit back, in 1700s, people were doing nothing for half of the year because it was dark and you couldn't plant or sow, and then they came drunk into church on Sundays. All right, so I don't think we're any lazier at all, and I think you're right. It's more hybrid now. Everything is more open that way, and it's also more exposed to some extent. But how do we build enterprises that are able to self-evidence more and be more how do we ensure we are not taking the lazy route like Klarna was about to do, but taking the value route instead?
That's reward and recognition systems, isn't it? That's the crux of this, and we see at a global level a significant shift in the way that capital will be deployed. So private capital, for example, is going to move significantly, and the German ecosystem has some of its frailties, but actually one of its biggest strengths is family organizations that are there for the long term. We've become very much back to that sort of short-term focus. The downside of the reporting that was put in after the market crash in the 20s was this quarterly report, and that was because prior to the 1929, effectively everything was nothing was reported, and if you got a report, you were lucky. And so all of these issues came up. And so the report was put in. Now, the intention was just to have visibility. What it's turned into in terms of the PLC sort of public company environment is my frame of reference is 12 weeks backwards and 12 weeks forwards, and nothing else matters. So if you're lucky, you've got a 6-month horizon on the world, and everything's driven that way. And the whole of the ecosystem around it, therefore, is driven that way as well. And so if we open up that to family businesses that are happy to be, well, I'm going to be there for 20 years, 30 years, etc. There's a lot of movement around and a lot of noise, especially in the US, around publicly traded organizations being acquired by private equity because about driving value. Now, private equity's changed over time, because it used to be buy a really poor asset and just turn it around quickly and put a bit of lipstick on it and hope that it looks nice for somebody. Even that's changing, because there's a realization that the world is not going to just turn around every 3 to 5 years. So we're starting to see those horizons broaden. What we haven't got is the systems and the mechanisms behind it in organizations that help that. So we have reward systems that are based on big annual bonuses, for example. So you've got a 12-month window. And if you're in Q4, guess what? You've got a 9-week window, or whatever it happens to be, depending on where you are. But we also have mechanisms where if you and I worked in the same organization, we're pitted against each other instead of with each other. So with these forced distribution curves. So all of these things that were all about trying to incentivize people to work harder, what ended up happening was, and we've seen this over time, is it's ended up eroding that to the point where people just sort of do their thing. It becomes more transactional. And I think if we can get a human connection back into work, which AI in theory should allow us to, back to the pushing the process as opposed to pushing an agenda.
Yeah, because reporting, what you're saying is reporting is sort of like a pre-training as well. We know what we want to measure before we know what's going to happen.
Correct. And it comes back to that self-reinforcing. Well, we told the marketplace that we were going to grow by 3%. So guess what? We'll find a way.
But that also means if that's true, what I just said as well, then AI is the perfect solution for the current way we drive our enterprises, because it's pre-trained. It knows exactly how to respond to your predefined KPIs, because they're also predefined.
Exactly. The beauty of it is that it will enable us as well to take what's changed. Because with the KPIs, what tends to happen is there's a large amount of data went in on an annual planning cycle that goes into that. And we say, right, there's the annual plan. But it doesn't adjust to what's happened in the marketplace since. And so back to the Martin Glenn comment is that we could end up with a situation where we're undershooting where we should be, when an environment might be, and it could be a temporary thing. The environment's good for us for a period of time, and then it's going to go bad again. And that's fine. That's the evolution of the world. And most strategists now talk about evolving strategy. It's organic. You don't just set something and then 5 years later reset it. It's all about how things change along the way.
Yeah, but this sounds a little bit like, in IT we've talked about composable architecture. I'm starting to talk about combustible, right? And I think that's also what people are talking about. We can spin it up immediately and quickly, and things are going to go faster and faster and faster. And I remember 15 years ago, I read George Agamben's State of Exception, a philosophy on legal philosophy, where he says that we change the law so often now in modern democracies that we don't have a state of law, we have a state of exception. Because if you make a change to a law 20 times over 10 years, you don't even, people cannot plan the future with it. And this whole, and to some extent, right, that's also what we're talking about here. It's saying, how can we adapt quicker to things that are happening? Use the technology to be more adaptable instead of more entrenched in almost, predictive ways of working that have been set in stone for decades or centuries, right? But what is the downside to this as well, right? Agamben's downside for the law thing was, in the future, law will be something people don't take seriously anymore. They just, it's something they play around with when they're bored, he says, right? Just whatever. It's just the law. And I'm not going to comment on if that's true right now, but things are definitely happening that makes me think about his quote again. That's why it's coming up for me. But also in technology, if we don't have a state of this is how it is, how can we define a space where we can move in, right? There you need to have a baseline to sort of make a decision from, right? I very much believe in these boundaries, right? The boundaries are productive, but if we don't have any boundaries anymore and we keep on just combusting things, Mark, is that a danger? Now it sounds, I've phrased it like a danger, but I actually want to hear your opinions about this, whether, what is the upside and what is the downside here? Because you just mentioned how it's a downside that there's all these typical ways we're working, these reporting and all these we're doing, but there's also a downside to getting rid of that, isn't there?
There is, and it's interesting. So, because I studied law originally, and so the beauty, I think, and it's what it for me, it works well in terms of it's always a frame of reference I go back to when I think about my career. Is UK laws based on precedent. So we're one of those unique sort of democracies that has laws that go back to 15, whatever it happens.
You don't have a constitution, do you?
No, well, that's true.
Just habits, just British habits.
Happened. And that's the whole point. And so I think for me, my frame of reference for law, I understand the whole, it's hard and fast and that sort of stuff. I remember learning to drive in Germany and being told that actually, if I pull out from a side road and I cause the car behind to brake, then I've broken the law and there's no right or wrong on that. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether they were speeding or not. Yeah, it was just I caused them to brake, and it was like that's an interesting way. And we've got these. I think a lot of these things, we end up with these sort of fixed perceptions of laws. There are downsides of precedent, but I think the upsides outweigh them in my experience, which is you make the best decision based on the information you have to hand at one point in time. And so a law shapes over time. You don't have to keep rewriting it, but you can keep reinterpreting it because of the way society and information flows. And I think that becomes an important part. And that's, for me, is where, as organizations, we tend to get trapped into, well, we made this rule and it's sort of, that's it. It's binary. Yeah, you're either in it or you're not. And it's why we struggle, and you sort of get a bit broader. And this is where the AI piece comes in interestingly, which is, we have laws and we say, right, that's the minimum standard required of an organization. And then we have ethics, and that's the minimum expectation of society. The problem is the second one's not written down.
No.
But we like that certainty within, rather than saying we're going to adjust and adapt to the environment we happen to be in. And I think that's where the big upside, AI enables us, if we embrace it in the way that it's possible to do. AI can enable us to be able to make that adaptation in real time in a way that we haven't been able to do before.
So so it can enable us to adapt more directly and on the spot to changing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So let me give you an example. So in a prior life, used an LLM to effectively forecast demand for product lines. And while it obviously, the downside was you need a huge amount of data. And what we found was on a particular product line, if you didn't have at least 200,000 data points, it wasn't really that great. But once you got to that point, the predictability of a product was able to be pinpointed. So, for example, the weather permutations on it on the 7-day forecast, knowing that, the demand there is going to double in the next 7 days because of the weather forecast, because that's what the world is doing. Our ability to adapt, but it takes a different organization, because from a manufacturing point of view in that environment, now I've got to have a much more flexible manufacturing process, whereas I would traditionally have a manufacturing process that's like, I'm going to produce 70 of those things, irrespective of whether I need them or not, because I'm going to do that. Whereas I might need 10 of those, 5 of those, 17 of them.
So it's increasing complexity as well, yeah?
It is. But I also think that it changes the way that we think about the structures and the setup, because it increases complexity, but done well, it minimizes the stock holdings, the wastages, all of those types of things. You think about audiovisual industry, TVs. TVs are changing every year. I mean, literally every year, and sometimes every 6 months. Your cycle of buying TVs, how often, when was the last time you bought a television? And then what was the last time before that? And we end up with all of these, they're all being sold on discount sites, aren't they? Because effectively we produce them to get to a price point. We couldn't sell them because there's not enough demand there, and therefore we actually just put them through on a discount.
By the way, my speakers, I bought the last one 21 years ago, so I think it's okay to buy new ones now. Thank you.
Exactly. I think you've earned, well, I think they've earned the rest and you've earned the privilege.
Yes, but but you're absolutely right. And I think I'm really, and now I say this is an explorative podcast, right? So it's quite good that I'm thinking very hard about that, what you said, about law, and I love to make these analogies and finding truths across domains, right? But you said don't rewrite, reinterpret, right? And I think most of people right now with AI are envisioning that they have to rewrite everything. And would you say, should we reinterpret instead? Is that actually the task right now? Is that the mandate right now, Marc?
I think that's absolutely the mandate. I think reinterpretate. I mean, it's just the structures we have in place are not going to change overnight. We'd never start from a blank canvas. It's the classic digital transformation in an organization. If you're starting from scratch, you can do everything on Industry 4.0 from the start. Yeah, IoT, connect the whole damn lot up. Fabulous. Yeah. Look at it. But back in Gotham City, where I'm fighting crime today, the reality is I've got 17 databases. I'm still running. I mean, a classic example is an organization I've been with previously. Was still in the mid 2020s, is effectively still using one part of their system still running on a Windows 95 computer, as an example. So we're so far from that lovely IoT scenario in reality.
That's just all the people working in Excel every day, and
exactly,
which still works, right?
Exactly, and so the reality is that we're always beholden to what we have today, because people don't have limitless time, limitless cash, et cetera, to change. Exactly. And so the important point is we're about reinterpreting, and what's the best way to reinterpret this and integrate it into the organization. And that's where I think the C-suite needs to step back and have a really good view and understanding of what's going on today and what a desirable outcome would be. It may only be stage one, but as long as we get to that point, then at that stage, we're able to say, right, well, what next? And what next? And it's all about building momentum, because back to that trust, we trust in things when we build momentum. We can see that success and going. But if what we're saying we're going to achieve falls dramatically short of what we actually achieve, then we undermine the trust immediately.
Yeah, but I think, the more I think about it, the more brilliant it is, right? Because reinterpreting also means let's look at what we're doing today, and can we make this in a slightly smarter, different way, and then make it more valuable, right? Rewriting means let's add something that we don't know, we didn't do, and see how that works. I remember we had a disruption council in Denmark, and one of the on a national level, and one of the members, I think she came off slightly unlucky in a video interview, because she said, and I was quite harsh on her at the time, because I felt she hadn't even looked up what disruption is. She just figured out what she think it is in a dictionary, right? So she was like, sometimes you got to burn everything and build it up again, like the Indians, and just, I want to disrupt my life. I was like, that's not how it works. That's not the concept of disruption. That's not, why are you on this council, right? But really, that rewriting thing that everyone feels right now, and everyone's out there pointing fingers at others for being, lawyers and everyone for being old-fashioned, and they should just, burn the lot, and let's build something better with AI, right? I think they're misunderstanding the point to that you have to have some sort of fertile ground to grow things from. You have to reinterpret the space you have. Yeah, like maybe God built the world in 7 days, but he didn't have an installed legacy base, right? So you have to. Can you reinterpret this? Can you look at this and see the opportunities in what we're already doing? That's where you find the value, right? That's why you're making it better instead of just making it different. Whoa.
Exactly. And we've seen this time and again. It's the big one I remember was back in the 90s when we were talking about copper shortages. Wow, how the world goes round in cycles a little bit as well. So the historian in you would love that one. But we were talking about copper shortages, and that was all about telecoms in Africa. And so the telecoms in Africa piece was all about the fact that we envisaged a world in Africa that would be telephone lines the same as they had in the Western world, but they didn't have an installed base. And so therefore, we never really needed the copper. In actual fact, they just went straight to mobile phones.
Yeah.
And they adopted mobile phones in Africa in many respects much quicker than the Western world did. But at the same time, you had that weird scenario roughly about the same time in the US where you had a mobile phone, but you couldn't phone out of state because effectively everything was bound by state lines. So you had this liberating technology that was in sort of penned in, so to speak, by the old thinking in the US. And it was completely liberating the whole of a continent on another side of things.
But at the same time, the whole value and the whole market was still in the US and UK, right? Because they had a phone market already. So there's upsides and downsides, right?
Correct. And these things, I think where we understand it's the type of it's the type of sandpit we're looking at is probably the important point here. So the reinterpreting is, we can completely redesign a sandpit in a marketplace where there's nothing that's sort of holding it back. But in a marketplace that's holding it back, yes, we're going to have to. We've got the certain infrastructure, we've got the laws, whatever it happens to be, that mean we do need to hold it back because there's just a practical reality. I understand your great idea over here, but in reality, there's just no way I can get to that in any meaningful way. So it's always going to sit outside as an interesting sort of side project.
So what's the mandate? The mandate clearly defined here. What is that based on this?
I think the mandate is to openly explore and reinterpret business as it is today in an AI-enabled future, but focusing very specifically on AI supporting the human, not supplanting the human. I think that's an important point. We're seeing too much of the hype around, I can't remember the company's name, but it's one of the companies in San Francisco, isn't it? Yeah, never hire a human again or something like that. It's like, that's really okay. Yes, you get a bit of column inches, so to speak, in a metaphorical sense, but it's not helpful because that's so unrelatable from where we are today and probably where we want to be. I mean, do we want to be there? You get very philosophical at that point in time as well. If nobody's got a job and everybody's on universal basic income, then who the hell's buying what you're selling?
I've said that tons of times as well. I don't get that. It's really weird. But also, you said in the beginning, we should have AI can enable different organizations. We talked about that, right? But it should not just destroy the organizations we're having. We need to make sure we're building different, better organizations, not just new ones that are necessarily better, right? Because there's a value already in what already works as well, right? I think that is also the mandate, right? Understand what works and what doesn't.
Exactly.
So, Marc, are we building products for markets and markets for products?
Oh, you throw my quote back at me in anger. At the moment, I do think we're trying to build markets for products. I think there are lots of great ideas, and we're trying to find opportunities in them. And let's be honest, most of the enthusiasm and energy is coming from people that are innovative. So therefore, that's naturally in their style. The key now is turning that, okay, the world could be like that, into a how do I practically get from where I am today to potentially that world and starting to create products for markets? So what problem am I going to solve? How am I going to solve it? Where does AI play its role? Where does it have its most impact? And where do I make it almost inevitable that somebody wants to buy my solution, as opposed to people scratching their head going, I just don't understand how I'm going to integrate that in.
Yeah. But so, I think you're absolutely right on that. I think it's I love that quote, and that's also why I threw it back at you, because I think it's very instructive right now, and also, just when you go around as a business consultant, also in AI, saying that am I actually trying just to conjure up a need that isn't there, right? Or am I actually attaching it to something they already need? Because I think that is the interpreting part. That is also a translation part, to make things move from a hype market, an innovator, Silicon Valley message, into something that works in operations, in a reality where there are clients and vendors and rules and regulations and mother-daughter companies and all that kind of complexity, right?
Exactly. And I think we underestimate sometimes the rules and regulations piece. Yeah,
Yeah.
in the world of move fast and break things, which effectively is the digital world, we still have real world practicalities. It's like, no, I'm sorry, but I can't do that in pharma. That's just the way it is. Yeah.
Kate O'Neill said that the regulation does not mean that you don't have a responsibility. It just means that the responsibility is squarely on you as an enterprise leader, because now they don't, the tool you're buying does not have to live up to anything. Now you have to figure out if it lives up to all these things, right? I love that perspective on regulation, because that means regulation creates markets that way, right?
Exactly.
So, Mark, this has been a really, really splendid conversation, and I'm really, really happy we got to do it. So, thank you for being here.
Oh no, it's been brilliant, and we I think we've covered a fair bit of ground, haven't we?
I think we have, definitely. And I have a final question for you, and I hope you're ready for it.
I am.
So, Mark, what is the only constant?
Now, you could go down the oft misquoted, the only constant is change, where I actually think the original quote was sort of emanated from something along the lines of life is flux, if I remember rightly. My historian in me sort of tells me that it was a reimagining of the exact words. But I'm going to go slightly different on this. I think the only constant is our desire to move in our heads much quicker than we can do in reality. Okay. And quite often that means that we miss some of the building blocks around. So take it to an AI perspective. If you think about it, when we moved into databases, and then we moved into big data, and now we're moving into AI, the reality is data's always been an underpinning part of that, yet we've still never fixed that basic. Yeah, we've assumed that if we get more and more data, then in theory we even out the anomalies. In actual fact, we probably made them more acute, because there's so many distractions in the data. And there's a piece of work that really does need to go on to try and fix that in any organization. The other part is, I don't think that, as I would say it, and I might upset some of the people in the AI space, is that making up the data, i.e. synthetic data, is not going to help us either. There is a piece of work that needs to happen. And so to get the real value out of it long term, we've got to fix that fundamental. And then that switch from products to products for markets, effectively away from markets for products, is an enabler, and it's going to take that bit of time. But engaging in the conversation, bring people in.
So, if I understand you correctly, the only constant is that there's a drag on the need for speed.
There is. Absolutely. It's the classic planning fallacy.
I was going to say the need for speed is a new constant, but then I thought, it's actually about the drag as well you spoke about.
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely is. It's the classic planning fallacy. I remember in program management when I did my sort of qualifications in program management, and there was the classic, Yeah, you go through all of the various biases that we have, and planning fallacy comes up, as you can imagine. And so we write down a plan and we say, right, it's going to take us from this to get to that. And interestingly, statistically, the most accurate plan that we could have is look at what something we did that looked similar to it and how long it took previously to do that. That's probably a better indicator, yet we'll always bring it back by saying, because we've written something down, it'll be a lot quicker.
Yeah, that's right. But Marc, thank you so much for that constant. And thank you so much for being a guest on The Only Constant today. I've loved having you, and it's been a real pleasure.
No, absolutely. Pleasure's all mine.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.